Jude Bellingham had already criticized Thomas Tuchel after England's quarterfinal against Norway. But after England crashed out to Argentina, he appears to have done it again. This time, Tuchel's decisions are at the center of the criticism, and the fallout is only getting bigger. Let's get into it. England had the lead. Anthony Gordon put it away in the 55th minute against Argentina in the World Cup semi-final. And for a stretch, it looked like Thomas Tuchel's side might actually hold on against the defending champions. Then Tuchel made a decision that would define the rest of his tenure in the eyes of a lot of people watching. The first 3 substitutions Tuchel made were all defensive, with the first seeing goalscorer Anthony Gordon come off for defender Dan Burn as England shifted to 5 at the back. Gordon, the man who scored the goal, walked off the pitch so England could sit deeper. Then Declan Rice was replaced by Nico O'Reilly, a substitution choice that was criticized by many. From there, it fell apart fast. From there, Argentina laid siege to the England goal, and that is where things went wrong. England had just 12% possession between Gordon's opener in the 55th minute and Lautaro Martinez's winner in the 90+2 minute. 12% for 35 minutes, England barely touched the ball. The pressure caught up with England when Enzo Fernandez scored a banger, and Lautaro Martinez finished off a messy cross. England conceded twice in 8 minutes. By full time, Argentina finished with 64% possession, 15 shots and 3 big chances after taking complete control during the closing stages. England, meanwhile, finished with just 36% possession, 5 shots and created only 0.53 xG. Lionel Messi and Argentina were headed to the final. England were headed home, and the inquest into how it happened started before the players had even left the pitch. That's where Bellingham comes in. As the result sank in, he stood near the middle of the stadium almost frozen, hands on hips while his teammates fell on their backs, crouched to their knees or simply sat down with their legs spread, all of them forced to watch Argentina celebrate. But Bellingham didn't stay frozen for long. Earlier in the game, he'd exchanged trash talk with Messi, and after Argentina's late goal, he started joying with Rodrigo de Paul in the center circle. Then, once the final whistle blew and Argentina's bench emptied onto the pitch to celebrate, things escalated further. Bellingham was standing by a group of celebrating Argentine players when he suddenly walked toward the group and slapped one of the reserves, Valentin Barco, on the back of the head. It's unclear whether Barco said something to spark it, but the clash pulled in players from both teams arguing. Bellingham had to be held back by multiple teammates. Seething after the collapse, Bellingham lost his cool when the unused substitute joined Argentina's celebrations. And that's when the slap landed. So you've got a player who scored 6 goals in the tournament, who carried England through 2 straight 2-goal knockout performances, watching his manager's tactical call blow up a lead in real time, and then physically lashing out once the whistle went. That's the picture. Now here's the part that connects directly to the manager standing a few yards away from him on the touchline. Because this wasn't the first time in this tournament that Bellingham had made his feelings about Tuchel's decisions known. And when reporters caught up with him after the Argentina defeat, the frustration wasn't just aimed at Barco or at Argentina's players. It circled straight back to the bench. Thomas Tuchel, the England coach who'd spent the entire World Cup talking about brave football, had spent the last week playing mind games with his star player, and now had to bear the blame for a collapse that started the moment he sent Gordon off for a 5th defender. Pundits were already lining up to say it. The press pack were scathing, with one senior football writer calling it close to sackable from Tuchel. The decision to go to 5 at the back as early as the second-half hydration break, in the 67th minute, was called inexplicable at the time and something that could go down as one of the most confounding moments in English football history. Wayne Rooney put it in plain terms on the BBC. If you're an attacking player and you go 1-0 up, and you see the changes the manager's making, you start losing belief. There's only so many times you can get away with sitting back and wondering how you're going to get through it. Alan Shearer wasn't any kinder. He played his hand, we knew he wanted to hang on, Shearer said. And the difference against Argentina, a team with the quality and the ability to punish you on the ball, is that the gamble backfired. So that's the climax: a lead, a set of defensive substitutions, an 8-minute collapse, a slap on the back of the head, and a manager suddenly facing questions about his job security. But to understand why Bellingham's frustration landed exactly where it did, squarely on his coach, you have to go back 4 days to the game before this one, when the exact same dynamic played out in miniature. Before Argentina, there was Norway. And before the slap, there was a much quieter, much colder exchange in a mixed zone that set the whole tone for what came after. England had just beaten Norway 2-1 in extra time in the quarterfinal, a game where they'd needed a Bellingham brace to come from behind. England advanced to the semi-finals thanks to a heroic brace from Bellingham. But as the team celebrated the win, Tuchel was more focused on what the players needed to do better, calling it a lucky win and bluntly chiding the team for their sloppy tactics. Think about that for a second. Bellingham scores both goals, drags his team through extra time, and the manager's headline reaction is to call the win lucky. In a post-game interview on Fox Sports, Tuchel didn't hold back, saying the commitment was there, but England had made life very difficult for themselves in the way they played. Sloppy, a lot of technical mistakes, not fast enough. When it got back to Bellingham, he didn't blow up. He brushed it off at first. Asked about Tuchel's criticism after the game, Bellingham brushed it off, saying, "Yeah, well, whatever," before adding that it was difficult out there and all the players had put in a tough shift. But that wasn't the end of it. Pressed further by reporters, Bellingham went from dismissive to pointed. He said Tuchel maybe didn't know what it was like to play in those conditions against Erling Haaland, Martin Odegaard, Antonio Nusa, and Alexander Sorloth, adding that Norway wasn't an easy team to play against and that England had tried to create a positive environment they should carry into the semi-final. Read that quote again. Maybe he doesn't know what it's like to play in those conditions. That's not a shrug, that's a player publicly suggesting his manager doesn't understand the reality on the pitch. Bellingham flatly disagreed with Tuchel's read on the performance. The rest of the quote made the disagreement even sharper. Bellingham said, "You're not going to win every game pumping the ball around and making 1,000 passes. Sometimes you have to win dirty," and England had done that again. It read like a direct answer to a manager who just called the same performance sloppy. This wasn't coming out of nowhere either, there was history. Saturday's disagreement brought back memories of the time Tuchel had singled out Bellingham's presence in the squad, going from an almost complimentary description of his edge to listing what he felt were the downsides of Bellingham's tendencies. Back in the middle of last year, Tuchel had laid it out in an interview. "Jude has a certain something," Tuchel said, "an edge that's welcome and needed if England want to achieve big things. But that edge needs to be aimed at opponents and not at intimidating teammates or being over-aggressive toward teammates or referees. He has the fire," Tuchel said, and he didn't want to dim that down. But the fire comes with attributes that can intimidate you, maybe even as a teammate. And you sometimes see the explosion toward referees and the anger in his game. So even before the World Cup got going, Tuchel had already gone on record questioning how Bellingham channels his intensity. That's the backdrop, a manager who's publicly flagged concerns about his best player's temperament, and a player who, the moment he felt undervalued after a career-defining performance, turned around and questioned whether that manager even understood the game he was managing. Naturally, this got framed as a full-blown rift. The England camp moved quickly to shut that down. Harry Kane was put in front of cameras to calm things. Harry Kane spoke on the tension between Tuchel and Bellingham that week. The Fox Sports panel weighed in too, and their read on it was more complicated than a simple standoff. Zlatan Ibrahimovic suggested the full context of Tuchel's comments may not have been presented to Bellingham by the reporter who asked him about it, saying if Jude had seen the actual interview with Tuchel, he'd have answered differently, 100%. Thierry Henry backed that read, insisting nothing had changed for him, that there was no animosity, nothing in it at all. Alexi Lalas took a different angle entirely. He didn't see a problem, he saw a feature. He said he didn't think it was a problem, he actually loved it, and that it was important for Tuchel to make sure the players knew they had work to do, while also loving that Bellingham had stood up for himself and his teammates. He didn't think the dynamic would change, he still thought the two respected each other, even disagreeing with each other, maybe in that one instance. Tuchel himself tried to smooth it over publicly too, ahead of the Argentina game. While calling for an improved performance, Tuchel insisted there was no disconnect with the team. A lot of things could be done better, which wasn't a problem. But there was no disconnect from him to his team, not 1%, because he was fully in love with his players and the way they performed. So going into the Argentina semi-final, the story was supposed to be settled. Kane had downplayed it, the pundits had downplayed it, Tuchel had downplayed it. It was framed as healthy tension between a demanding coach and a fiery talent, the kind of battle of wills that was actually good for the team. Then Argentina happened, and the same dynamic that had just played out in words after Norway played out in consequences after the semi-final. Except this time there was no game left to win it back in. To understand why Bellingham's frustration hit different after Argentina than it did after Norway, you need to sit inside the actual minutes of that semi-final. Because the tactical picture painted by almost everyone watching was of a manager who had the game won and chose to give it away. England had gone ahead through Gordon in the 55th minute. Up to that point, Tuchel argued England had produced one of their strongest performances of the entire World Cup. The plan, whatever it had been, was working. Then came the hydration break. Tuchel's first substitution took off the goal scorer, Gordon, for the defender Dan Burn, shifting England into a back five. That's worth sitting with. The player who just scored the goal that put England ahead in a World Cup semi-final was the first one taken off, so his team could sit deeper and defend the lead instead of extending it. After taking the lead, Tuchel started replacing attacking players with defenders to protect the one-goal margin. Gordon made way for Ezri Konsa, and Declan Rice was pulled for Nico O'Reilly. A call that was criticized by many. 3 changes, all defensive. All within a stretch where England had, by any measure, been the better team. What followed was not a backs-to-the-wall defensive masterclass, it was a collapse. England had just 12% possession between Gordon's opener and Martinez's winner in the 2nd minute of stoppage time. A team that had committed to sitting deep found itself unable to get out from under the pressure it had invited. The defensive substitutions handed Argentina more control and possession, which ultimately let Messi create 2 assists in a swift comeback. Enzo Fernandez struck first, then Martinez finished a Messi delivery in the closing seconds. 8 minutes, 2 goals, tournament over. Tuchel's explanation afterward leaned entirely on the idea that hindsight makes every loser look foolish. Asked if he believed he'd got his decisions wrong, Tuchel said no. That's just the nature of the game. As soon as you lose, you get criticized. And no one knows what would have happened with different decisions. So it makes no sense to engage with that and lose his head, because he's responsible for the calls he made and takes the criticism that comes with them. He repeated a version of that line to multiple outlets. We decided to go to a back five because the gaps were just too open. He said, of course, the responsibility is on the coach. And if it doesn't go well, it's easy to say it was wrong. But easy to say it was wrong undersells how loudly people were saying it and how fast. Tuchel, who had spent the entire World Cup talking about brave football and the last week playing mind games with his star player, was blamed by critics who noted it wasn't coming home this time. Instead, his tactics had come home to roost. Even Tuchel's own words from before the tournament's business end were used against him. It was a curious choice for a coach who'd said before the quarterfinal that at this stage of the tournament, his team needed to be on the front foot and be brave, that they had to go for it or there'd be regrets. He built the message around courage. Then, up a goal against the reigning champions, he coached like a man terrified of losing what he had. Tuchel's own account of it afterward described Argentina playing with more risk and rhythm, like a team with nothing left to lose, while England played with the feeling they had a lot to lose. So they dropped into a deep block, not a problem in itself, he said, but they struggled to stay active in it, struggled to defend crosses, couldn't get the momentum back, and Argentina took full advantage. That's essentially an admission that his team stopped competing to protect a lead the moment they got one. Harry Kane, the captain, didn't dress it up much either. Kane was critical of the team's response to going in front, saying that once they went 1-0 up, they seemed to just try to hold on, which at this level is just not enough, and that he was gutted. This wasn't just another disappointing exit for a country used to disappointing exits, either. Though the pattern was familiar, England's exit followed a similar pattern to recent tournament defeats, including their World Cup semi-final loss to Croatia in 2018, and the Euro 2020 final loss to Italy, where they took the lead in both games only to lose. What made this one different was how specifically the blame attached to one-man substitutions. In real time on the touchline in front of the player who'd have to live with the consequences of them. Bellingham didn't need a stat sheet to know his team had stopped attacking. He was on the pitch watching it happen, watching the ball get taken away from him, one hydration break at a time. And that's the bridge into what happened once the whistle actually blew. Because everything that had been simmering under the surface between player and manager for the better part of a week came out on the pitch in public with cameras rolling the moment the result was final. There's a difference between a player brushing off a manager's comments in a mixed zone and a player who can't hold himself together on the pitch. After Norway, Bellingham gave the world, yeah, well, whatever. After Argentina, there was no whatever left in him. The frustration didn't wait for the final whistle to show itself. Bellingham's frustrations boiled over into confrontation more than once during the match. Earlier in the game, he'd exchanged trash talk with Messi. That's Lionel Messi in a World Cup semi-final, with his team still level. Bellingham was already running hot before Argentina had even taken the lead. Then came the goal that ended it. After Argentina scored their go-ahead goal in the 2nd minute of stoppage time, Bellingham started joying with Rodrigo de Paul in the center circle. Not a handshake, not a nod of respect to the winner. An argument right as the result was becoming permanent. Bellingham, who had been excellent throughout the tournament, struggled on that particular Wednesday, and it showed in everything that happened once the whistle went. The slap on Barco wasn't an isolated flash of temper. It was the last domino in a chain that had been falling since the hydration break in the second half. Seething after England collapsed to lose 2-1, Bellingham lost his cool when unused substitute Valentin Barco joined Argentina's celebrations, slapping the 21-year-old across the back of the head. Barco hadn't even played, he was a substitute who never got on the pitch, simply celebrating with his teammates, and he became the target of a World Cup semi-finalist's frustration. Bellingham walked toward the celebrating group and slapped Barco on the back of the head. It's unclear whether Barco said something to start it, but it led both players, plus others from both teams, to start arguing. Footage from the Spanish outlet Diario AS showed the angle of the hit particularly clearly, and Bellingham had to be held back by multiple teammates. Picture that scene: a World Cup semifinal has just ended. One team is celebrating a trip to the final. The other team's best player is being physically restrained by his own teammate after hitting an opponent who never left the bench. That's not whatever. That's a player who has run completely out of patience. Not just with Argentina, but with everything that led to this result, starting with the decisions made on his own bench. The reaction from the pundit class was immediate and largely unforgiving. Of the situation Tuchel had put his best player in, England star Jude Bellingham found himself in an epic post-match meltdown that saw him slap the head of Argentinian player Valentin Barco in the immediate aftermath of the semi-final loss, while manager Thomas Tuchel was copying it from all angles. Notice how those two stories got told together, not separately. The player's blow-up and the manager's tactical collapse were treated as two symptoms of the same underlying problem. A camp that had been fraying since Norway pushed past its limit in the biggest game of the tournament. Reporters and fans online piled onto Tuchel, specifically for the way his substitutions had set the stage for the chaos that followed. One fan summed up the mood that had built across the whole tournament. Thomas Tuchel took the wrong players, never got his team selection nailed down. His in-game decisions were baffling. He was bailaid out by Jude Bellingham and company time and again. Being in the semi-final was thanks to the players, not him, and he is the reason they are going home. Another simply called it a failure of nerve at the exact moment nerve mattered most. His reaction to England taking the lead backfired terribly. Such a disappointment was how one reporter put it, while another argued it was far too defensive, far too early, against a team that has repeatedly shown it refuses to be beaten. That's the picture that had formed by the time Bellingham was speaking to reporters again. Not a manager and a player smoothing over a minor disagreement, like the panel had suggested after Norway, but a manager whose in-game calls had just been blamed publicly for ending his best player's World Cup. In the same set of headlines describing that same player throwing hands at an opponent's bench. The scrutiny on Tuchel had been sharpened further by a simmering dispute with his star man that had followed the team through the closing stages of the tournament. And now there was no next game to paper over it with. Norway had ended in a win, so the tension got framed as spice, as healthy competitiveness, as a battle of wills that made the team better. Argentina ended in nothing, no next match to point to. Just the slap, the shouting match with De Paul, the trash talk with Messi, and a set of substitutions that everybody from Wayne Rooney to Alan Shearer to national newspapers said had cost the game. So when Bellingham eventually spoke, it wasn't the shrugging, dismissive tone from 4 days earlier. It came from a player who just watched his manager hand the initiative to Messi's Argentina one substitution at a time, and who had nowhere left to put that anger except onto the pitch itself, and onto the record once more, aimed squarely at the bench. Bellingham called it what it felt like. Jude Bellingham was devastated, declaring it a very sad day after England were eliminated by Argentina in the semi-finals of the 2026 World Cup. That's the first thing he said once the adrenaline of the Barco incident had worn off. Not anger, sadness, but the anger hadn't disappeared. It had just found its real target. Because while Bellingham was grieving the result, the tactical inquest around Tuchel kept building. And it built in exactly the direction that made the Norway comments look less like a one-off, and more like a pattern the player had been trying to warn everyone about all along. If Tuchel really didn't know what it was like out there against elite opponents, the accusation Bellingham had made after Norway, then the collapse against Argentina looked, to a lot of people, like the proof. Tuchel wasn't backing down from any of it, and he wasn't going anywhere either. Tuchel vowed to stay on as England boss until Euro 2028, and defended his tactical adjustments in the semi-final loss. He kept leaning on the same explanation he'd given in the immediate aftermath, that losses invite second guessing and he wasn't going to chase ghosts. "I believe that's the nature of the game," he said. "As soon as you lose, you get criticized. It's just what it is. No one knows what would have happened if different decisions had been made. So it makes no sense to engage with that and lose his head." That answer, delivered calmly days after his best player had to be physically pulled off an opponent, didn't land the way Tuchel probably wanted it to. To a lot of people watching, it read as a manager refusing to reckon with a decision that had visibly broken his own dressing room's composure in real time. One columnist called it remarkable that a coach appointed for his tactical acumen and his perceived ability to get over the line had actually forced England further away from it, with a response he described as pure football cowardice. A coach appointed at great expense for exactly the qualities he'd failed to show when it mattered. The Barco incident itself carried its own separate weight, entirely apart from the tactics conversation. Bellingham hadn't just voiced frustration this time. He'd put his hands on an opponent, on camera, in front of the entire football world. Footage showed England's star appearing to hit the 21-year-old after the loss. Whatever discipline followed from that moment would be Bellingham's alone to deal with, separate from anything Tuchel said or didn't say about substitutions. But the two threads, the slap and the tactics, never really separated in how the story got told, because they happened in the same 90 minutes to the same player as a direct result of the same collapse. A manager sends off his goalscorer to sit deeper. The team can't get out from under the pressure. The lead disappears in 8 minutes. And the player who'd carried the team on his back all tournament ends up restrained by his own teammates, because he has nowhere else to put what just happened to him. Kane had spent the week before Argentina trying to smooth over the idea that there was any real division in the camp. Kane had spoken on the tension between Tuchel and Bellingham that week, refuting talk of divisions in the England camp. After the result, that job got a lot harder because the tension wasn't hypothetical anymore. It had a scoreline attached to it and a viral clip attached to it, and a manager who'd already said he intended to still be in the job by the next major tournament. Whatever gets said in training grounds and mixed zones over the coming weeks, the outline of it is already public. A manager who called a career night from his best player sloppy. A player who suggested that manager didn't understand the conditions his team was playing in. A semi-final where that manager took off the goalscorer to protect a lead, and watched the lead vanish anyway. And a player who walked off that pitch angry enough to put his hands on someone who hadn't even played. Bellingham said it himself in his own way back after Norway, when he talked about what it takes to get results at this level. That you don't win every game by popping the ball around and making 1,000 passes. That sometimes you have to win dirty. Against Argentina, England didn't get the chance to win dirty or any other way. They got a hydration break, a back five, and 8 minutes that ended a tournament. Everything Bellingham did after that whistle, the words to Messi, the shouting at DePaul, the slap on Barco, the sadness he admitted to afterward, traces back to that same 8 minutes, and to the man on the touchline who made the calls inside them. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed watching this video, click on one of the boxes playing on your screen to watch more similar content. Jude Bellingham pushes back on criticism from England manager Thomas Tuchel after win over Norway. Thierry Henry, Zlatan downplay Thomas Tuchel-Jude Bellingham tension. England's Thomas Tuchel, Jude Bellingham clash again before World Cup semi-final versus Argentina. Thomas Tuchel vows to stay as England boss, defends tactics versus Argentina. Kane refutes talk of divisions in England camp after Tuchel and Bellingham's disagreement. World Cup 2026, Jude Bellingham and Thomas Tuchel's battle of wills is healthy for England. England's Jude Bellingham confronts Argentina players after semi-final loss. Appears to slap Valentin Barco. Watch Jude Bellingham slap Argentina player in the head after blowing World Cup semi-final. Easy to say it is wrong, England's coach breaks silence after FIFA World Cup exit to Argentina. England manager Thomas Tuchel under heavy scrutiny in loss versus Argentina. Jude Bellingham backs England stars after Thomas Tuchel criticism. Jude Bellingham devastated after England's World Cup exit versus Argentina. A very sad day. Watch Jude Bellingham scuffle with Argentina players after England's loss in World Cup. Soccer World roasts Thomas Tuchel after England blows semi-final to Argentina. World Cup, Tuchel slammed for sackable England tactics versus Argentina. World Cup 2026, is Thomas Tuchel to blame for England's loss to Argentina? Why did Jude Bellingham slap Valentin Barco after England-Argentina? England v Argentina World Cup, Bellingham hits Barco